Sure. So foster care exists. So usually the legal term is usually dependency, but people get that confused and think that has to do with like a chemical dependency. So
Actually, the legal term is not dependency. Dependency means a ward of the state. It means what it says. It means the child is abandoned.
So I'll use the layman's term of foster care. So foster care exists for situations when a child is in a home that for some reason there's a health, safety, or welfare concern, and the children are removed from the home.
The only time a child can be placed into a foster home is if the child is abandoned.
They either would go to a relative or possibly a licensed foster home. And the purpose is that to protect the kids first and foremost, but it also gives the parents the opportunity to avail themselves of services from the state or other agencies to rectify some their parental deficiencies. So
I'm sorry, but she doesn't know what she's talking about because there's no such program as dependency as it relates to rehabilitating a parent. The juvenile is the defendant in a dependency.
So I've heard it described as it's not supposed to be a punitive process. It's supposed to be a therapeutic legal process. So that's kind of why foster care exists and what's supposed to happen. Ideally, the parents take advantage of all the services that are being offered, and then they're able to address whatever their issue is. Most of the time, it's a drug addiction, that kind of thing. And then the children are able to safely return home to their parents' care.
So the goal of foster care would be that reunification.
Absolutely, yes. There's a law from 1997. It's the, let me see if I can find what it's called because all of a sudden it's gone. Oh, the Adoption and Safe Families Act. And that helped kind of lay out that the idea for foster care is for children to reunify with their parents. That law also laid out some timeframes for and other things to help make the process easier and to work more in children's best interest. So they do have some permanency, but it still makes it so that the important thing is that the children are able to go home. That's the first goal.
And of those 10 cases, how many have resulted in reunification with the parent?
Oh, sorry, can you repeat that?
All right, of the 10, I think you said 10 cases as a CASA, how many of those resulted in reunification with the parent?
Let's see. I think I'm blanking a little bit. I think only one. I'd have to think about that a little more closely. But
I feel like the question that's popping into my mind, that's probably popping into a lot of people's minds, is how, like, as a mother, are you able to witness these situations and really be in the thick of them without a sense of judgment? Because I think it would be so easy for so many of us. Okay, I just watched this documentary about foster care, and I just feel stupid saying that. I feel like the health fitness person who's like, oh my God, I just watched this documentary on sugar, and now I'm never gonna eat sugar again, like whatever. But it was a really good documentary, and it kind of opened my eyes to what it's like from the parent side of things, because I feel like it was just really easy for me to fall into like, oh my gosh, foster care. Instantly, I think like the foster parents are saints, and the parents who don't have the kids have done something so horrible, and they're horrible people. Like, how do you kind of work in that situation without falling into that judgment?
It can be really hard sometimes. I mean, I'm not going to lie. It's really hard. If there's a child that's, especially one that somehow reminds me of my own kids, that really hits home and can be hard. But I remind myself that, everyone involved is a broken human being. There's no one that touches the system that's perfect and lives an absolutely perfect life. I'm certainly not a perfect mother, and I would never want to give the impression that I am. So I try and keep that in mind, and also keep, so many of the parents, they're dealing with things that are so hard that I couldn't even imagine. They've either grown up in foster homes themselves, or they're struggling with an addiction or a mental illness. And I remember that even though the important thing is that the kids are safe, I don't want to ever minimize what harm may or may not have happened to the children. I also need to see that the parents they're people too. They're loved children of God, and they need to, they're never going to be able to address their parental deficiencies if everyone writes them off and thinks that they're absolutely incapable of improving themselves and their families. If it just wouldn't work, right? If we went in and we said, oh, you're a terrible person, you've done terrible things, and you should never have your kids again. That's not the point. We have to believe that people are capable of change. And there are some standards in place that are set up so that we aren't waiting forever, because that's not good for the kids' interests too. But we want to give the parents time to try and address what they need to address, to work on what they need to work on.
Is there a typical length of time that a kid is in foster care for, or is it like so dependent on the circumstance?
It varies. Well, so I think I can start by saying this. So I practice both in state court and in tribal court. And in tribal court, it does tend to be a much quicker process in my experience. They tend to either have a permanent guardianship in place or return home within a year or quicker. It can vary in state court, and I can only speak to what happens in Washington State. I haven't practiced anywhere else, so I don't know what that looks like. But in Washington State, it can really vary. There are some guidelines that say, so if a child has been out of home for 15 of the last 22 months, the state has to file for termination of the parental rights. There's some nuance to that. There can be some reasons to delay that, or some circumstances where maybe it even occurs quicker. It can vary, but that's kind of the standard. That's what we're supposed to have, some permanency for the children who have been in the system for 15 of the last 22 months out of home.
So why do you think that foster care is a Catholic issue, or like an issue that Catholics should be paying attention to at all? Like, where does your faith come into play with this?
Sure. Well, I think for me personally, I think there's just been a lot of things in my life where it points to God saying, you're doing what you should be doing. This is exactly where you're supposed to be. So that's my personal way that my faith plays into what I do. But as for, I think, as our faith in general, our hearts are supposed to break for things that break the heart of Jesus. And there's so many ways that that this issue, I believe, is close to the heart of God. First and foremost, obviously, are the children involved, caring for the what they've been through, and having some compassion and understanding is so important. That's what these kids need. They need role models. They need a teacher who cares, someone who's going to, maybe your kids have friends who are at school who are in foster care. These kids need people around them that show that they're cared and loved. But I think also there's the other people involved. We need to look at the parents, what they're going through, and what underlying societal issues led to the circumstances of the situation. Like the opioid crisis is really increasing the number of children in foster care right now. And oftentimes I don't think that it's the parents just chose to become an addict. So can we look as a society at what's the underlying concern there, and how can we address it? These people are suffering too. So how can we as a society, as a culture, as our faith, how can we be the hands and feet of God? How can we serve and love these people? I mean, I think that's one of our main callings as Christians and as Catholics, is to love and serve God, and to so how can we do that? And to me, that this is such a big, important issue, that it's so important, and so something that touches so many of us, and that we all can have some role in helping to alleviate. So I hope I'm not coming off as let's all charge into battle. I think we're all called to do what we're capable of, where we're capable of doing it. But this issue has so many factors that feed into it that we all can have some impact in some way.
Oh, I'm all about charging into battle. I'm like, let's charge. I just think it's like you said, people charge in different ways, right? Like some people need to be the prayer warriors, and some people need to whip out the checkbooks, and some people need to make the signs. Like we all have these roles to play in this battle, but it's a battle against evil, and we should all be in it. So I'm totally with you. I also think, when you were talking earlier about the idea of, like people having the capacity to change, like that is so Catholic to me. The idea that like we're not writing people off and seeing them as like the sum of their mistakes or failures, but instead seeing them as like capable, because that's how God made them. And like our focus as Catholics on the family is so strong. And when you mention things like the opioid crisis, like that is literally raging war on the family. And so anything that does that needs to be a Catholic issue, because the family is so central to our faith. So that really stands out to me too. Does that resonate with you?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that really helps. I think it's easy for people who are involved in foster care, whether they're foster parents or attorneys like myself or social workers. It's easy to get exhausted and jaded and burned out. I suppose on that I can mention that in Washington State, social workers, they don't tend to stick with the department to investigate these situations and advocate for these or work for these families for more than a year before they're burned out. So we have a huge revolving door. And so for me, I see having being a person of faith, that means that we have this hope that you can keep coming back to. For me, that helps keep me from getting burned out. But I think it also is so important that we can bring that to this discussion, that we can bring this sense of hope and redemption that people may not have heard or experienced in their lives. And so to be able to be that for someone else, to bring that to this discussion is so, I think, really helpful.
Hey, y'all. I hope you're enjoying my conversation with Brianna. I wanted to take a quick time out and let you know about today's episode partner, Audible. You guys, I love me some audiobooks. I read a lot, like more than most people that I know, and one easy way that I'm able to do so is through audiobooks. Specifically, I really like listening. When you talk about being burned out, how do you balance that experience with your career? Because I have to imagine that there's plenty of times where it's just super emotionally overwhelming. And I think of like, I don't know, like my husband's a software engineer. He sits in front of a computer all day. Like, yeah, it's hard, but it's not the same thing at all. Like he's not getting emotionally burnt out from life insurance apps, which are what he does. So like, how do you do the work that you do while maintaining that sense of faith and not just giving into despair?
I think for me, I have a few tools, I think, in my toolkit. I think first is, I think my faith does help me, that I'm able to, sit and pray if I need to, or, just to have, like I said, that overall sense of hope that God is at work, even when it looks hard and frustrating and terrible. I also have my wonderful kids that remind me that there are, that what I see and deal with at work every day is not the norm. There's 1 out of 8 kids have been touched by CPS at some point. There's been some concern at some point has been raised. And but that's 1 in 8. That's not the majority of kids are not in foster care. It's easy for me to feel that way, but that's not the case. Most families are not struggling in the same ways as so many of my clients. So I look at my kids and they're healthy and happy, and that gives me hope that, oh yes, and some reminder that, oh yes, not all children are that way. So that kind of helps me leave my work at work. I think the other thing that really helps is, for me, I try and acknowledge when a situation is particularly hard, if there's a situation where I'm advocating for the children's best interest, but I can't seem to punch my way through. I can't seem to find or help create a situation that's better for these kids. If I can't, or I've had a situation where a child has died on one of my caseloads, and that has just really been hard. But I kind of acknowledged I'm feeling really frustrated or very sad about this, and I don't try and stuff it down. As attorneys, we're pushed to be hard and not to show any vulnerability, but I don't think that's really healthy. I think there's part of why there's so many mental health issues with a lot of attorneys. So for me, I try and feel and acknowledge my emotions. And if I come home and I say, guys, I'm really sad, I need something really awful happened at work today, I need 20 minutes, I need half an hour just to, feel it. I need to cry, I need to do whatever. Once I get home, then I do it. And I think that really helps me as well. So, so just trying to acknowledge where things are and meet myself where I am.
Totally. How much of your work are you able to share with your family? Because I would imagine when you come home and it's a really hard day, but it's not like you can tell really specific stories. And you also probably don't want to frighten your children, I would guess. Like, how do you manage that?
Absolutely. I mean, with my son, he knows, obviously he's 7, so he understands a little bit more about what mama does. But with him, I will say, I will say something like, I had a really bad day at work. I wasn't able to do something for kids that I really wanted to, or something really, really terrible happened and I can't discuss it, but this is why I'm really sad. So I'll say that much with the kids, and with my family. But yeah, it is really hard not to be able to not to be able to discuss it with them. I think that's part of why I find myself when I am in a situation where I can discuss it. If I'm talking to someone who's already part of or familiar with the case, or if I'm talking with my supervisor at work, I'll kind of just vent a little bit, because those are places where I'm allowed to vent a little bit more, where there aren't those confidentiality concerns. I also have a therapist that I've seen when I needed to, and I think that helps too. But it is a really hard thing. I think it is really hard, but these families, they deserve our confidentiality, right? So I kind of have to keep in mind what's the goal and how is it best going to be accomplished.
Right. So what would you say to a Catholic listening right now who's considering foster care as a way of growing their family? Are there any first steps you suggest they take, or any things you think they should avoid doing? What are your thoughts?
Well, obviously start by prayer. It's a huge discernment, and I think starting by praying and examining why and how, and is this really the best decision for your family? So start there. The next thing I would say is, if your goal is to grow your family, then you're probably not in the right frame of mind. And I feel kind of harsh saying that, but because the goal is to reunify the family, that's the best thing for the children is always going to be to go home. So you have to be able to enter having a foster child in your home with having two, I don't know, I don't want to say two minds, two hearts, but to acknowledge that there are two possibilities, and you have to be full of grace and hope for both of them. You have to be ready and prepared to take this child into your life forever if that's what's best and they need to be adopted. Or you need to be able to support the children going home. And in either scenario, as long as it's safe and healthy and in the child's best interests, which usually it is, the children need to have a relationship with their parents no matter what. So you're never going to be you're never going to replace the biological parent. That's just never going to happen. But you can be their parent, you can be their adoptive parent, but they still need to know where they came from, and they still need to know that their mom and dad, their birth mom and dad, those are real people, and they deserve, maybe the child is never going to be in a place or might not be in a place to love and respect them or whatever, but they still need to be cared for and thought of and acknowledged as being part of their story. And even better if they can have a relationship with them in some way. So I would say to have that kind of mindset when you go into it, to be open to where God is moving in this family and in this situation, and to just be willing to support what's best for the kid ultimately. So that's what I would say. There's also obviously there's the practical matters. You'd have to take their classes, and a social worker will need to visit your home. And there's all of those practical things, but they vary by state and what agency you might be working with. So I can't quite describe all of that for everybody, but that was a frame of mind that I would say start with. And then everything else you can probably find just by looking into it online. I hate to say it, but
no, it's
it might
so
be better
true
to do that.
because I'm sure it varies state to state, but I'm really, really glad you brought up that mindset piece for a couple of reasons. First of all, because I feel like whenever I read about how expensive adoption is, people chime in with foster care being free, and I'm always like, what the what? But when you foster, that is not the same thing. Like those two terms are not interchangeable, and I see that all the time.
Yes, absolutely. And, they're not wrong in that. It is easy. Well, I don't want to say easier. It's not easier. It is less expensive to adopt a child through foster care. But, oh, my goodness, the emotional cost, it's not an easy path. And I don't want to discourage anybody. There's absolutely a need for foster families. And if you feel called to do that, by all means, God bless you, do it. I don't want to discourage that. But it needs to be with the right mindset, because that's what the kids really need. They don't need someone who's going to go in and I'm going to save these kids and this child is our family, and their biological parents, that prior story doesn't matter. That's not helpful for anybody. So it needs to be done. We need foster parents, but we need the right foster parents.
This is a huge question to put on your shoulders, but I feel like when someone's hearing this, it would be really natural to be like, ooh, I don't know if I can do that. Like, I don't know emotionally if I can handle that. Do you think that that's a natural thing to think for all foster parents, or do you think that that could be a sign that maybe someone isn't called to that path? Does that make sense?
Oh, well, yes, that is a big question. I would go back. I think that discernment is really a very personal thing, and you have to kind of see where God is calling you. I would say that as a biological parent, are we ever prepared to be a parent? I think
right.
Absolutely not. We never know what we're getting into. You never know if God is calling you to have. Maybe your child is born and they are healthy and doing well all their life. Maybe you're called to, and you have your child and you discover they have some significant emotional needs or cognitive difficulties, or you just never know what you're going to get. So I think it's the same with foster care, that you can't assume that you're going in knowing what you're going to have and experience as a foster parent. No parent fostering, biological, adoptive, spiritual, you never know what you're going to get as a parent. You're just given what God gives you and you rise to the challenge. So I think that there's both at play, and you have to really examine what's going on in your life and listen to the Holy Spirit and what's going on. So it's really up to the person.
Right. And I feel like when we're saying, like if you were to be a foster parent and then that child ended up being reunified with their parents, you're trying to choose the best thing for the child, even though that's so hard on you. And like, don't all parents do that all the time? Like, probably not to that, definitely not to that extent. I've never faced that heartbreak with my own kids, and God willing, I never will. But aren't we always saying like what's best for the child, even though it's really hard on me emotionally, like putting the needs of the child above your own emotional needs? I mean, that's just parenting at its core.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely right. I don't believe that as parents, we're called, life is not I'm going to mess it up, but I think it's Pope Benedict who says we're not called for comfort, we're called for greatness, right? So, something along those lines. I'm terribly butchering the quote, but the point is it's not an easy path as a parent. We're never going to have the easy road. We're always going to have, children are going to stretch us and grow us in ways that are really uncomfortable. And that's the case whether the child is born to you or whether it's a foster child in your home. But yes, the idea is that you want the child to go home, and because that's what's best for them, even if it's not easy for you. And I'll also add, sometimes it's easy. I see foster parents, they have so much more financial resources. They have, maybe stable marriages, or they have their health. They have all these things, and they say, well, look at all these things I can give this child. Obviously, being in my home is what's best, but being with their biological parent, if it's safe and healthy and in their best interests to do so, is always going to be in their best interest. It's not about whether they're going to be, parent of the year. Are they going to be the best parent for this child? So I think that's the other thing to consider.
That was really beautifully said. So what if you know that you aren't called to be a foster parent, whether it's in this season or you're just never called to that line? Do you have any ideas for how we as Catholics can love our brothers and sisters who are fostering or whose children are currently in the foster system? Either like, how can we love the people involved in these situations?
Well, so I would start, there are 400,000 kids in foster care right now. So chances are somehow someone that's life is being touched by a foster child right now. So, maybe there's someone in your church that's fostering. Maybe that there's someone at your kid's school that is a foster kid. There's some way that you may know someone that's involved in the system. So you can always reach out to the families. I would always start by going to the source, ask, how can I help you? How can I support you? How can I pray for you? I would say, and like I said, prayer is also great. There are lots of organizations out there that you can donate to or support. I think the Casey Family Foundation, for one, they are a great program that really addresses how can we prevent families from breaking up in this way in the first place? How can we support families before their children are removed and into foster care? So supporting organizations